I never thought a single plate of ribs could turn my dream neighborhood into a nightmare. But when the HOA president banned my entire family from stepping foot in Oak Ridge Heights, I realized I'd underestimated just how far she'd go. And when my dad, a federal judge, decided to fight back with the full weight of the law, the whole county felt the shockwaves. Before you go any further, post in the comments, what would you do if someone tried to rip your family away from you over a backyard barbecue? The smell of hickory smoke and sizzling ribs filled my patio last Saturday afternoon, and for the first time in months, I felt at home. I'd moved into Oak Ridge Heights 3 months ago, drawn by the manicured lawns, the sparkling community pool, and the promise of a peaceful life. My sister Emily had driven up from Charlotte with her kids, Tyler and Sophie, aged 8 and 5, and the sound of their laughter as they darted through the sprinkler was pure joy. My parents, Robert and Linda Carter, had surprised me with a cooler of iced tea and Mom's famous peach cobbler. After a grueling year of late nights at my new job as a project manager, this weekend was my reset button. "Uncle Matt, catch!" Tyler shouted, tossing a water balloon my way. I dodged just in time, laughing as it splashed against the deck. Emily grinned, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You're getting slow, big brother. Maybe it's time to retire from the dodgeball league." "Never," I shot back, flipping a rack of ribs on the grill. The sun was dipping low, casting a golden glow over the rolling hills behind my house. Everything felt perfect, until a sharp voice sliced through the air like a knife. "Excuse me, what is this commotion?" I turned to see a woman striding across my lawn, her heels sinking into the grass. She was in her late 50s, with a tight blonde bun and a navy blazer that screamed authority. In her hand was a clipboard, and her lips were pursed so hard they could have cracked. Behind her trailed a younger man in a polo shirt, scribbling notes on a tablet. "I'm Matt Carter," I said, setting down my tongs. "Just having a family barbecue. Can I help you?" Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the yard. "I'm Patricia Hensley, president of the Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association. Are these individuals registered guests?" She pointed at Emily and the kids, who froze mid-splash. "Registered?" Emily echoed, confusion wrinkling her brow. "They're my family. They're here for the weekend." Patricia's posture stiffened. "According to our bylaws, all visitors must be registered with the HOA office 72 hours in advance. This is a clear violation." Her tone was ice-cold, like she was reading a court verdict. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Wait, you're serious? Nobody told me I had to register my own sister and her kids." "It's in the covenant you signed, Mr. Carter," she replied, tapping her clipboard. "Page 39, Bylaw 4.9. Unregistered visitors, excessive noise, and that minivan parked in your driveway, it's all improper." Emily stepped forward, her voice rising. "The kids are just playing. They're not hurting anyone." Patricia ignored her, scribbling furiously. "Consider this your first formal warning. 3 violations result in fines. I suggest you have them leave immediately." My stomach dropped. "Hold on. I didn't know about this rule. I'll register them Monday morning." "That's not how it works," Patricia said with a tight smile. "They need to go now. Rules maintain our property values." From the patio, my dad stood up. At 64, Robert Carter still carried the quiet authority of a federal judge. "Excuse me, Patricia, is it? I'm Matt's father. Are you saying my grandchildren can't visit their uncle without paperwork?" Her eyes flickered with recognition. "Judge Carter? Even judges must follow HOA regulations. The rules apply to everyone." Dad nodded, his voice calm but firm. "Interesting. I'd like to see the legal precedent for an HOA restricting family visitation rights on private property. Does your covenant explicitly state that family members require pre-approval?" Patricia flushed. "It says all visitors. I'll overlook this violation this once, but ensure future guests are registered." She marched off, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. "Wow," Emily muttered. "Does she patrol everyone's backyard?" "First time I've seen it," I said, forcing a smile. "Probably nothing." But as we resumed the barbecue, the relaxed vibe was gone. Tyler tugged at my sleeve. "Are we going to get kicked out, Uncle Matt?" "Of course not, buddy," I reassured him, though a knot tightened in my chest. That woman wasn't just serious, she was relentless. That night, after the kids were asleep, Dad and I sat on the patio with beers. "That HOA president," he said quietly, "reminds me of cases I've handled. People who confuse authority with power. You should read your covenant carefully, Matt." I shrugged. "It's probably just an overzealous board member." Dad didn't look convinced. "In my experience, those who monitor kids playing don't stop there." I brushed it off, but his words lingered as I watched the fireflies dance in the dark. Monday morning, I found a yellow notice taped to my door. Formal warning, 3 violations: unregistered guests, noise disturbance, improper parking. Beside it was a flyer for the neighborhood 4th of July parade, with Patricia Hensley listed as Grand Marshal. My gut told me this was just the beginning. I thought my 35th birthday would be the perfect escape from the HOA drama, but when Patricia Hensley stormed onto my porch with a $600 fine for my parents' surprise visit, I realized she wasn't just enforcing rules. She was hunting for control. And as I watched her snap photos of my mom's car like a private investigator, I knew this was about to get personal. The scent of Mom's chocolate birthday cake still lingered in my kitchen as she carried it in, candles flickering with her off-key singing of Happy Birthday. Dad followed with a wrapped gift box, his grin wide. They'd driven 3 hours from Raleigh to surprise me, and after a brutal week at work, their visit was exactly what I needed. "You didn't have to do this," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "Nonsense, Matthew," Mom replied, setting the cake down. "We'd never missed your birthday." We moved to the front porch with glasses of iced tea, the evening air warm and sweet. Dad asked about my promotion, and I was mid-sentence about my new corner office when I noticed a black SUV circling the block. Once, twice, it finally parked across the street. My heart sank as Patricia Hensley stepped out, flanked by 2 HOA board members, a balding man in a golf shirt and a woman with a severe ponytail. They marched toward my house like they owned the place. "Matthew Carter," Patricia called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Those individuals on your porch need to be identified immediately." I stood, my pulse racing. "These are my parents, Patricia. They surprised me for my birthday." The balding man tapped his tablet. "No visitor registration on file." "That's violation number 2, Carter." "I'm Greg Thompson, HOA Vice President." His tone dripped with smug satisfaction. "And I'm Susan Miller, Secretary," the woman added, adjusting her glasses. "Unregistered guests are strictly prohibited. We take community security seriously." Mom's jaw dropped. "Security? We're just visiting our son. Without registration, we have no way of knowing that," Susan snapped. "You could be anyone." Dad stood slowly, his judge's calm kicking in. "We met last month, Patricia. Judge Robert Carter. Legal professionals should understand the importance of reasonable restrictions and unreasonable ones." Patricia's lips tightened. "Even more reason for you to respect our regulations. Rules apply to everyone." She stepped onto my porch uninvited, and I felt my blood boil. Greg handed me a pink slip. "We're issuing a $600 fine for this violation, effective immediately. Payment due in 10 days. $600? I nearly choked. Because my parents showed up for my birthday? "First violation was a warning," Patricia said, her patience clearly fake. "Second violations carry penalties, as stated in Section 7 of your covenant." "This is insane," I said, my voice shaking. "They're my parents, not criminals." "Rules apply equally," Susan interjected, "or they mean nothing." Dad touched my arm, his voice steady. "Matt, may I see the bylaw they're citing?" Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps you should review the covenant you signed, Judge Carter. This isn't your courtroom." Greg pulled out his phone, snapping photos of my parents' car. "For documentation purposes," he said, smirking. "Is that necessary?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. I could see the hurt in her eyes, and it made my chest tighten. "Absolutely," Patricia replied. "We document all violations with photographic evidence." As they marched back to their SUV, I noticed neighbors peeking from behind curtains, some disappearing when I looked their way. "I'm so sorry," I told my parents, my hands clenched. I had no idea they'd go this far. Dad examined the fine, his brow furrowing. $600 is excessive for a visitation issue. "Have you read the full covenant?" I admitted I hadn't. Like most people, I'd skimmed the 80-page document before signing. "You've got a problem here, son," Dad said, his tone grave. "This kind of behavior doesn't improve without intervention." Mom looked worried. "Will we need to register every time we visit?" "Absolutely not," I said, my resolve hardening. "This is my home, not a prison." That night, after cake and gifts, I couldn't sleep. I dug out the HOA covenant and started reading. The visitor policy mentioned extended stays and guests using community amenities, nothing about family visits. My anger grew with every page. How could they justify this? The next morning, I knocked on my neighbor Ethan's door. He'd lived in Oak Ridge Heights for 6 years. "Has the HOA always been this strict?" I asked. Ethan glanced around nervously before answering. "It got worse when Patricia took over 2 years ago. Before that, the rules were there, but no one enforced them like this. Has anyone fought back? I pressed. The Johnsons tried, he said, lowering his voice. They got fined for having their cousins over for Thanksgiving. After they complained, their trash pickup mysteriously stopped for a month. Then they started getting weekly landscaping notices. I walked back to my house, my mind racing. That afternoon, a note appeared in my mailbox. Board meeting Wednesday, 7 p.m. Your attendance requested. The handwriting matched Patricia's from the violation notice. When I called Dad to tell him, his voice shifted to what Mom called his courtroom tone. Send me the note, he said. It's time we looked into what powers your HOA actually has, and what powers they don't. As I hung up, an email pinged on my phone. The HOA had sent a community-wide message announcing new security measures, visitor background checks, and mandatory ID cards for all guests. The first line read, "Due to recent unauthorized visitor concerns." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. Then another email arrived from an anonymous address. Don't fight them. They always win. My sister's screams from the passenger seat shattered the night. But when Patricia Hensley blocked my driveway with her SUV during a medical emergency, I realized she wasn't just a control freak. She was dangerous. And as I watched my sister bleed while the HOA board stood firm, I knew this fight was about to get ugly. I jolted awake at 4:45 a.m. to my phone ringing off the hook. Emily's voice was frantic on the other end. "Matt, my water broke. The baby's coming, 6 weeks early." My heart slammed against my chest as I threw on a hoodie and raced to the guest room. Emily and her husband, Ryan, had been staying with me while their house in Durham was under renovation. The doctor had said the baby wouldn't come for another month, but now Emily was doubled over, clutching her stomach, her face pale with pain. "Breathe, Em," I said, my voice trembling as I helped her to my car. Ryan grabbed their hospital bag, his hands shaking. "We'll be at the hospital in 15 minutes. But as I backed out of the driveway, headlights blinded me. A black SUV screeched to a stop, blocking my exit. My stomach dropped. Patricia Hensley stepped out, flanked by Greg and 2 other HOA board members I didn't recognize. "Going somewhere with unregistered guests?" Patricia asked, pointing at Emily, who let out a guttural moan, gripping the dashboard. "My sister is in labor," I shouted, slamming my hand on the steering wheel. "Move your car now." Patricia crossed her arms, her face a mask of cold indifference. "You should have thought about emergencies before breaking our rules repeatedly." Ryan ran up, his voice cracking. "Please, our baby's coming early. We need to get to the hospital." Greg pulled out his phone, recording us like we were on some reality show. "More violations to document," he said, his tone smug. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? This is a medical emergency. Rules don't bend for emergencies," Patricia said, checking her watch. "I'll need a doctor's note to confirm this isn't another attempt to bypass our visitor policy." Emily screamed again, and I saw blood staining her jeans. My vision blurred with panic. "Call an ambulance," I yelled to Ryan, who was already dialing 911. Patricia's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time, but she didn't move her car. Neighbors started appearing in their doorways, some in pajamas, watching the chaos unfold. Mrs. Davis, an older woman from across the street, hurried over, her bathrobe flapping. "Patricia, what in heaven's name are you doing? That girl needs help." "Stay out of this, Margaret," Patricia snapped. "This is HOA business." 10 agonizing minutes passed before I heard sirens in the distance. The paramedics had to park on the street and wheel a gurney around Patricia's SUV. They assessed Emily quickly, their faces grim. "We need to move, now," one of them said, helping her onto the stretcher. Ryan climbed into the ambulance, his eyes wild with fear. "I'm coming with you," he told Emily, squeezing her hand. I turned to Patricia, my voice low and shaking with rage. "Move your car. Now." She didn't budge. Instead, she raised her voice for the growing crowd. "The board has voted. Due to your repeated violations, all unregistered guests are banned from Oak Ridge Heights. Your family is no longer welcome here." Gasps rippled through the neighbors. "You can't ban someone's family," Mrs. Davis protested, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Actually, we can," Greg said, holding up his tablet. Section 47.3 gives the board emergency powers to protect community standards. I didn't have time to argue. I needed to get to the hospital. Finally, Patricia moved her SUV, and I sped off, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Emily delivered a tiny baby girl an hour later, but my relief was short-lived. She was whisked to the NICU for breathing issues. While Emily rested, I called Dad, my voice breaking as I explained everything. There was a long silence on the other end. "Dad, are you there?" "I'm here," he said, his tone eerily calm. "Text me Patricia and Greg's full names and addresses." "What are you going to do?" I asked, my heart still racing. "Nothing illegal," he replied. "But no one endangers my granddaughter and gets away with it." Back at Oak Ridge Heights, while I sat in the hospital waiting room, my phone buzzed with texts from neighbors. They sent photos of Patricia and Greg setting up orange cones at the neighborhood entrance, a sign reading, "Visitor checkpoint. All guests must present HOA approval." Mrs. Davis texted me directly. "They've lost their minds, Matt. What are we going to do?" I stared at the photos, my anger boiling over. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It was personal. And I wasn't going to let them win. I thought the HOA couldn't get more arrogant, until Patricia smirked at me from the courthouse steps, bragging she'd bury me with her legal team, only for a leaked audio recording to drop that night, exposing her lies and sending her empire crumbling before my eyes. The days after the fire and the camera discovery were a whirlwind. The police took the device as evidence, and Dad worked the phones, his voice a low rumble as he coordinated with the county prosecutor. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge Heights buzzed with rumors. Neighbors whispered about the hidden camera, their trust in Patricia eroding. But she didn't flinch. At the next board meeting, she strode in like a queen, her head high, flanked by Greg and Susan, who smirked as if they'd already won. "We've reviewed the incident," Patricia announced, her voice ringing through the community center. The fire was a prank, and the camera was a security measure to protect our neighborhood. Matthew Carter's accusations are baseless. The room murmured, but her confidence silenced most. She leaned into the mic, her eyes locking on mine. "We filed a countersuit against you for defamation, Mr. Carter. Your family's band stands, and we're seeking $10,000 in damages." My stomach churned, but Greg chimed in, grinning. "We've got the best lawyers in Raleigh. You can't touch us." Susan nodded, adjusting her glasses. "The county has no jurisdiction over our private community standards." They laughed, their arrogance palpable, and I felt a wave of helplessness crash over me. How could they be so untouchable? Dad squeezed my shoulder, his face grim. "They're bluffing," he whispered. "But we need solid evidence." That night, he pored over documents at my kitchen table, his laptop glowing. "The county's audit is slow," he said, rubbing his temples. "We need something to hit them hard." Meanwhile, across town, Mrs. Davis hosted a secret meeting in her garage. A dozen neighbors gathered, their faces lit by a single lamp. "We can't let them get away with this," she said, her voice trembling with resolve. "Matt's family ban is just the start. They've been overcharging us for years." Ethan nodded, passing around a stack of old HOA bills. "I found discrepancies, $50,000 unaccounted for last year alone. Back at my house, I couldn't sleep. The countersuit loomed over me like a storm cloud. Then, at 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. This changes everything." I stumbled to my laptop, my hands shaking. An anonymous sender had attached an audio file labeled HOA Truth. I hit play, and Patricia's voice filled the room, sharp and unmistakable. "We'll bury Carter with legal fees," she said. "The camera? Just a little insurance. Greg, make sure the landscaping money gets rerouted. My sister's firm needs that contract." A male voice, Greg's, laughed. "Don't worry, Pat. The board's in our pocket. Even if the county snoops, they'll find nothing." My breath caught. This was gold, proof of corruption and intent. I forwarded it to Dad, my heart pounding. "We've got them," I texted. He called back instantly. "This is dynamite, Matt. I'm sending it to the prosecutor now. We'll move for an emergency hearing tomorrow." The next morning, the neighborhood was electric. Sarah from the Oak Ridge Gazette was already at my door, her recorder ready. "I heard about a leak," she said, her eyes gleaming. "What do you know?" Before I could answer, my phone pinged with a news alert. County prosecutor to investigate Oak Ridge Heights HOA over alleged fraud. Patricia's smugness vanished when she saw the headline on her own porch, her face paling as reporters swarmed. At the courthouse, she tried to rally. "This is a smear campaign," she shouted, but the new judge, a stern woman named Judge Ellen Hayes, cut her off. "I've reviewed the audio evidence, Ms. Hensley. This hearing will proceed." Patricia's lawyer whispered frantically, but the damage was done. Greg slumped in his seat, and Susan's hands trembled as she clutched her tablet. Dad leaned over to me, his voice low. They thought they were invincible. That recording just shattered their shield. Outside, neighbors cheered as the hearing adjourned, the county freezing HOA funds and suspending the board's authority. Patricia glared at me, her voice a hiss. You'll regret this, Carter. We have connections. But the tide had turned. That night, Mrs. Davis brought over a pie, her smile wide. We're free, Matt. Thanks to you, and that recording. I looked out at the dark windows of Patricia's house, feeling the weight of her stare. This wasn't over, but for the first time, I believed we could win. I never imagined I'd see Patricia Hensley back down, but when the county prosecutor raided the HOA office with a court order in hand, her empire started to crack, and as Dad and I watched her scramble, we knew we had her on the ropes. Yet the fire in her eyes told us this wasn't over, and we decided to finish it for good. The morning after the audio leak hit the news, Oak Ridge Heights was a battlefield of whispers and action. Dad and I stood on my porch, watching county officials swarm the HOA office across the street. Men and women in crisp suits carried boxes of files, their faces set with purpose. The leaked recording had lit a fire under the prosecutor's office, and now they were here with a court order to seize all financial records. I felt a surge of triumph. Patricia couldn't talk her way out of this. She stood at the office door, her face red with fury, shouting at a tall woman leading the raid. You can't just barge in. This is private property. Her voice cracked, but the woman held up a document, her tone unyielding. This is a legal inspection under county code, Ms. Hensley. Step aside, or we'll have you removed. Greg hovered nearby, still in his bathrobe, his usual smirk replaced by panic. Susan clutched her tablet like a lifeline, her glasses slipping down her nose as she whispered to Patricia. But there was no stopping this. Neighbors gathered, their murmurs growing louder. Mrs. Davis, standing beside me, clutched my arm. This is because of you and your dad, Matt. You're giving us our neighborhood back. Dad's eyes gleamed with the focus of a man who'd spent decades in courtrooms. We're just getting started, he said, pulling out his phone. He called in a favor from Judge Ellen Hayes, who'd fast-tracked the county's investigation after hearing the audio. They've been operating outside their legal authority for years, he told me. The county found $75,000 in unaccounted payments to shell companies tied to Patricia's family. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Sarah from the Oak Ridge Gazette was live tweeting the raid. Breaking news, Oak Ridge Heights HOA under investigation for fraud. Sources say board president Patricia Hensley may face charges. I refreshed my phone, watching the retweets climb 500, then 1,000. The story was going viral, and Patricia's reign was unraveling in real time. Back at the office, Patricia spotted us and stormed over, her heels clicking with fury. You think you've won? She hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Dad. I've run this community for 15 years. I have connections you can't touch. Dad didn't flinch. So do I, Miss Hensley, he said, his voice calm but sharp. The difference is, mine are legal. Can you say the same? He held up a file he'd been carrying, his trump card. This is a formal complaint to the state attorney general. It details 22 violations of state law by your board, including misuse of funds and illegal surveillance. Her face went pale, but she recovered quickly, her eyes burning with defiance. You'll never prove it. Our lawyers will bury you in paperwork for years. Good luck with that, Dad replied, handing her a copy of the complaint. The county's already frozen your funds. Your lawyers won't work for free. The crowd gasped as Patricia snatched the paper, her hands shaking. Greg stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. This is a witch hunt. We've done nothing wrong. But his voice lacked conviction, and neighbors weren't buying it. Ethan shouted, then explained the $50,000 for a pool project that never happened. As the officials loaded the last boxes into their vans, Patricia retreated to the office, slamming the door. The raid was over, but the damage was done. That evening, Dad and I sat in my living room, the TV on low. A news anchor reported, Oak Ridge Heights HOA board members face possible fraud charges. The investigation has uncovered ties to county officials, hinting at a larger scandal. I looked at Dad, a mix of relief and determination surging through me. We're winning, I said, my voice steady. They're falling apart. We are, he agreed, but his expression was serious. Look at her today, she's down, but not out. People like Patricia don't give up easily. She'll fight dirty to save herself. I nodded, my jaw tightening. Then we go further. We don't just stop them. We dismantle the HOA completely. No one should ever go through this again. Dad's eyes met mine, a spark of pride in them. Agreed. Let's draft a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. We'll take it to the county board next week. He stood, rolling up his sleeves. This isn't just about us anymore, Matt. It's about every family here. Outside, the streetlights cast a soft glow over the neighborhood, but Patricia's house was dark. I knew she was in there, plotting her next move. We'd won this round, but the war wasn't over, and I was ready to fight until the end. I never thought I'd see Patricia Hensley in handcuffs, but as the county sheriff led her away and Oak Ridge Heights erupted in cheers, I realized we hadn't just won. We'd rewritten the rules for our community forever. And when my family walked through the gates as heroes, I knew we'd turned our nightmare into a legacy. The final showdown came faster than I expected. A week after the raid, Dad and I stood before the county board, presenting our petition to dissolve the Oak Ridge Heights HOA. The room was packed with residents, their faces a mix of hope and defiance. Dad's voice carried the weight of years on the bench as he laid out the evidence. Over $120,000 in misappropriated funds, illegal surveillance, and a decade of intimidation tactics. This HOA has abused its power long enough. Patricia and Greg sat in the front row, their lawyers whispering furiously. She tried to rally her allies, claiming the investigation was a personal vendetta, but the evidence was airtight. The leaked audio, financial records, and even testimonies from former board members who'd flipped on her painted a damning picture. When the county board voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA, the room exploded in applause. I grabbed Dad's hand, my chest swelling with pride. We did it, I whispered. But the real victory came the next day. As I sipped coffee on my porch, two sheriff's cars pulled up to Patricia's house. Neighbors gathered, phones out, as deputies escorted her and Greg out in handcuffs. Patricia Hensley, you're under arrest for fraud and embezzlement, one deputy announced. Her face twisted with rage, but there was no escape. Greg hung his head, his arrogance gone. A news helicopter buzzed overhead, capturing the moment for the evening broadcast. Mrs. Davis ran over, tears in her eyes. Matt, you and your dad saved us. We're free. Ethan clapped me on the back, grinning. I just got my grandkids' visit approved, no forms, no fines. First time in years. The street filled with neighbors, some hugging, others snapping photos of Patricia's downfall. Sarah from the Oak Ridge Gazette approached, her recorder ready. Matt, you're the talk of the county. How does it feel to bring down a corrupt HOA? I smiled, my heart full. It feels like justice. This was never just about me, it was about all of us. That evening, the neighborhood threw a block party to celebrate. Tables lined the street with potluck dishes, Mom brought her peach cobbler, and Emily carried her baby girl, now healthy and giggling. Tyler and Sophie raced through the crowd, free to play without fear of clipboard-wielding enforcers. Dad raised a glass of lemonade, his voice booming. To Oak Ridge Heights, a community that fights for what's right. Cheers erupted, and I felt a lump in my throat. Later, as the sun dipped low, a group of residents approached me with a proposal. They wanted me to lead a new neighborhood council, one focused on fairness and transparency. You and your family stood up for us, Mrs. Davis said. We trust you, Matt. I glanced at Dad, who nodded with pride. I'm in, I said, my voice steady. The final nail in the HOA's coffin came a month later. Patricia was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and Greg got 3. The county recovered $90,000 of the stolen funds, which we used to build a new playground, named Carter Park in honor of my family's fight. As I watched Tyler and Sophie climb the slide on opening day, Emily hugged me tight. You gave us this, Matt. A place where family comes first. Our neighborhood transformed overnight. Gates that once symbolized control now stood open, welcoming visitors with a new sign. All families welcome anytime. Oak Ridge Heights wasn't just a place to live anymore. It was a community built on trust. And as I looked out at the laughter and joy around me, I knew we'd turned our darkest moments into a brighter future. So what do you think? Could you stand up to a corrupt HOA like we did? Drop a comment below and let me know. Subscribe to hear more stories of everyday heroes fighting for what's right. Because in Oak Ridge Heights, we proved that no one's above the law, not even the HOA.